Hello everyone, and welcome back to Warships Blitz with Terry. Today we will be looking at a new tech tree line that is upcoming, that's currently in preview, the Japanese light cruisers. So, before we begin, I need to put something out there. I like light cruisers. Light cruisers are probably, especially support cruisers, are probably one of my favorite roles to play in the ship, in the game. Role of ship to play in the game, this way. And as such, I had relatively high hopes for this, and I was very keen to see how these things would play out, because we did get the Pan-Asian cruisers, which are scout cruisers, which are fun in their own right, but so far really the only existing support, like true support cruiser role, is with the American light cruisers, which I enjoy. So I was quite keen to see these. And that's sort of the lens that I'm going to be looking at the line under. But let's begin and actually start looking at the new tech tree line. It's not in the tech tree yet because it's in preview. It's going to come out in a future point. But at tier 5, we are starting out with the Omono class of light cruisers. And this, I think, was the last one that actually existed, because the Japanese did not really build much after that, because they simply didn't have the dockyard capacity and other stuff is more important. These were mainly used for sort of destroyer leader and submarine squadron coordination purposes, in not as much as, say, the US was using them for anti-aircraft purposes, although the 150mm guns were somewhat dual purpose capable, but they were manually loaded and they weren't great at it. So the Omono class, there were a couple of them built actually, and they effectively reused the Congo's 150mm guns. These are, I think, Vickers NM something. Can't really remember, but these were, because Congo was originally built in the UK. These were effectively either rebuilds or just modifications of these, and they were reused in the Omonos and for coastal defense. Then at tier 6 we see a ship named Gokase, which did not exist, I think. There was the Oyodo class of light cruisers that was supposed to succeed the Omonos in that specific role as submarine and destroyer leaders, but I think they only had two triple 150s, so they wouldn't really fit in here that well. But maybe we'll see her as a premium at some point. But still, the same guns, just a hypothetical further ship. So before we move on any further, let's take a quick look and see what the ship skills are, because it's tier 6 and we should start seeing something. So we have defensive AA. That's the start. It's defensive AA 1. So let's have a very brief look and see what's going on with these ships. So decently fast. Maneuverability is not grand, but it's all right. And we get 152mm guns, 8 of them. 9-second reload is a bit on the long side, but we've got a 5% fire chance, which is okay. We can work with that. And as is typical for Japanese, relatively good high explosive shells. And we get the ubiquitous torpedoes. The AA is not yet quite grand, but it starts showing, and the concealment is pretty good. Then at tier 7 we've got the Omono class, and this is using the 155mm third year. These were the Yamato's secondaries, I believe, and she's using them in 12 guns as her main guns, and again has torpedoes, and has a quite substantial AA for her tier. And if we look at the we look at the skills, we start seeing the Def AA2 here. What we're not seeing is a sonar or any other kind of utility so far. Then at tier 8 we get to the Shimanto, which has which sort of further pushes the theme here. The turrets are at this point no longer existing. These are just hypothetical turrets. I'm not sure what they've done here. You see that basically that bone-shaped log that's sitting on. This is probably is probably the gun director. These were not sitting on top of the turrets. I don't know if this is a graphical bug, but that should have been sitting sort of inside, more fused with the turret rather than just being a log on top of it. But given that these turrets themselves didn't exist, so, Wargaming can make things up as they go. But I would have liked if these were a little bit more integrated rather than sort of welded on top of it. Sounds like a weird choice. Anyway, at this point, we are approaching battleship maneuverability. And we are at tier 8 now. So poor maneuverability. We do have a new type of gun, however. And the reload with 10.5 seconds for 150s at tier 8 is not fantastic. But we are starting to see a relatively decent loadout of torpedoes. We have a decent amount of AA. Concealment's getting a little worse. And we're still having the Def AA2. So still no further utility than that. Then tier 9, we're starting to see the Takahashi, which is probably just a continuation of the tier 8. Yep, worse maneuverability, more guns, 15 150s, 10-second reload, however, to compensate for the sheer amount of them. More torpedoes. AA, I think, is going to start struggling a bit at this tier, because you will get into tier 10 games. But we are getting the Def AA3, so the small caliber gets 200% boost, and that sort of makes it work. And then at tier 10 we have the Yodo, which has, I think, the largest number of guns. I'm not sure how many Smolensk gets. I think Smolensk has 16 as well, but has 16. That thing gets 6 triple turrets. That is a lot of guns. But again, long reload, good range, however, and the same hypothetical 5th year type 150 mils. The torpedoes are there, and the AA is okay. The AA range is not great, but it's workable, especially on the large caliber. So they would have had the 100mm dual purpose things that you see on the AA destroyers that unfortunately don't have an awful lot of AA, like the Akizuki and successors. And in terms of ship skills here, we are now starting to see the sonar and the Def AA3 as well. So that is that. But before we get all the way ahead of ourselves, how does this compare to the traditional heavy cruiser line on the Japanese tech tree? Well, the Japanese heavy cruisers are damage dealers. They're fairly specialized ships in that they don't maneuver very well, but they have a lot of firepower, and they are not very good in tight situations. So these are not ships where you go in and control objectives. These are ships that are more. They're not support ships at all. These are they're damage dealing ships, and that's the only way sort of how you can support your team in dealing as much damage as you can, using fires, using synergy, using the torpedoes, and effectively staying at standoff range as far as possible to compensate for the poor maneuverability. Now, for a support cruiser role, and that's kind of where I was hoping the light cruisers would go, to be sort of a Japanese flavored American light cruiser line, you need sort of two things. You need the utility, you need the rate of fire, and you need somewhat maneuverability if you want to play at dangerous ranges. And this is not something you have in the light cruisers. In fact, the light cruisers are sort of playstyle-wise, from what I found so far, almost more similar to the heavy cruisers, just that they are a little bit more focused on, a little bit more focused around the guns, and having the AA. And that's not necessarily bad. I'm just saying that's, if you're expecting a competitor to the American line, then you're somewhat mistaken. They're still better than the heavy cruisers in dealing with things like dishing out damage at destroyers, for example, due to the rate of fire. But, or the number of guns, really, because the rate of fire is not great in typical Japanese fashion. But you're sorely lacking the utility. There is no sonar, there's no radar, there's no no nothing until you reach tier 10, then you get the sonar. You do get the relatively good AA, so in that regard, they are decent. But other than that, it's difficult to slot them into a support role. Anyway, for today, and I will be looking at tier 10 as well, but for today, let's start looking at the Omono at tier 7. And for that, we will actually try to compare her to a couple of things, because we did have the Tokachi as a premium, and I quite liked the Tokachi. She was lightly armored, but occasionally maneuverable, and while the AA was deceptive, she was a lot of fun. So let's compare these two, and we see that we get the exact same AA. It's a good start, right? The same problem of, well, relatively low hit point pool and just enough armor, more like the British light cruisers, just enough armor to make sure that shells don't overpenetrate. But in the maneuverability, we see where it starts becoming a problem, because the Tokachi is noticeably more maneuverable than this thing. An 8.7 second base turn time is not great for a light cruiser. And obviously the Tokachi has the 127mm guns, which have almost half the rate of fire on these things. And you've got the same number of them. Now, given the 155s on the Omono do more damage, and a 6% fire chance is nothing to sneeze at, but a 9-second reload is on the long side. And you do get more torpedoes, but you have a significantly longer reload on the Omono. And the AA is a more balanced setup, which is good, because the Tokachi actually really didn't do an awful lot, but the concealment still is better. So, okay, well, it's a premium, you know how things go. Let's have a comparison with the Miyoko, the heavy cruiser. And as I mentioned, the Miyokos, or the heavy cruisers in general, are not support cruisers. They are very much solitary, or like I would almost say egoistical damage dealers. And they don't have an awful lot of options to support the team with the utility. Obviously, Miyoko gets the precise aim, and these things get the defensive AA. Miyoko's a bit better armored, it's got more hit points, and the Miyoko, as a heavy cruiser, is noticeably more maneuverable than this thing. And you start seeing a theme here. So the guns obviously reload longer, but these are 203mm guns. I mean, yes, she gets 10 of them, not 12. And yeah, you have 2 seconds longer reload, but they're 203mm guns, and you've got the precise aim. So they obviously hit a little bit harder. Still, given that you can mostly ignore the armor piercing on Japanese cruisers, the difference is not all that great, to be honest. Torpedo-wise, we also see the difference between the light cruiser and the heavy cruiser line. The light cruisers are doing more damage with their torpedoes, which is welcome, but the torpedoes are a bit slower and tend to take a long time to reload. And yes, obviously the light cruiser gets the better AA, whereas as a Japanese heavy cruiser, aircraft are a big problem for you generally. So how does she then hold up against, say, the Brooklyn, the American Tier 7 light cruiser, which is not a great ship, but it's a fun ship. And it's a good segue towards the Cleveland, which is a great ship in my opinion. Now, the Omono gets the better AA, the better AA skill, but the Brooklyn starts getting sonar. The Brooklyn is noticeably more sturdy than this thing, and noticeably more maneuverable than this thing. Yes, you're starting to see the theme here, right? Also, the Brooklyn gets 15 guns with a half-second faster reload. Yes, granted, she only gets a 4% fire chance, and her high explosive shells are nowhere near as good, but I would say not that much of a difference there. Plus, the Brooklyn obviously has some secondaries, which can be surprisingly fun to use if you are dealing with destroyers, for example. Whereas, obviously, the Omono gets the torpedoes, which the Brooklyn doesn't have. And in terms of AA, again, the Omono actually has the edge here. Better defensive AA and better large caliber AA damage. So it's sort of a Brooklyn. Now, the problem really that you're going to start seeing with these things, and that's coming down to expectation, right? If you are expecting to play support cruiser, you struggle. And that might be one reason why I've been struggling with this line so far. The maneuverability is not there, which means that if you get yourself into danger, you have a really, really hard time surviving, because these ships don't maneuver particularly well. They are, in fact, worse than the heavy cruisers, which means that they have to be played in a similar role as the heavy cruisers are, for which they do kind of work, but it feels almost like a bit of a waste, honestly, because it's a very different playstyle for me. Anyway, let's go through the setup that I've chosen here. You can get the choice between main battery reload versus large caliber AA and hit points. The choice is yours. I think they're both sensible. You're not going to be up against carriers every single time. 5% is not a massive amount, but it's decent, and the 2% extra hit points are okay. They're not having a huge hit point pool anyway, but I went with the reload because the reload's relatively atrocious on these things. You can, if you were so inclined, get a historical camouflage, and I'm not considering that anybody would necessarily purchase the historical camo for it, which is why I've been playing it with standard camo, and that is that. Equipment-wise, main battery reload. So as you can see, I'm sort of trying to compensate here for the fact that the reload is poor, and that's a second thing, the dispersion is atrociously bad, which is okay if you're reloading reasonably fast, but it's not very good. Other than that, there's sort of two options that you can go, and so you could try to go double steering and try to compensate for the poor maneuverability and play more like a support cruiser. The problem then that you're having is the poor acceleration, because this thing with the propulsion mod has a decent 12-second acceleration to full speed. But if you are planning on going up against destroyers and you have neither the acceleration nor the utility, because you don't have sonar, nor the maneuverability, then it gets really, really tricky. The other option is what I've done here, and use effectively what you would on a heavy cruiser and try to play more of the range damage dealer sort of style. So to go with the propulsion mod 1 and the concealment system. And with that set up, we're still at for a light cruiser, pretty terrible 8.7 second turn time. But we've now got the reload down to just over 8 seconds for 12 guns, which is nice. And forget about the AP on these guns, but except maybe against destroyers at close range, and even then it's almost debatable, because the high explosive on these guns is really good, and you are doing almost the same amount of damage with the HE as you do with the AP. So very, very good high explosive shells, and you get the fire chance. Torpedoes, yeah, we've talked about those, but the concealment is now down to just over 7 kilometers. Commander skills, what do you want? Well, you could consider using battlefield support, and you maybe should, because that'll give you an additional sonar tier 10, but even before that, it'll give you an additional defensive AA and the air defense expert, because honestly, the AA on these ships is not bad. The problem becomes that it's not good enough if you're alone somewhere to defend you from enemy carrier strikes. It'll make the carrier pay for it, but it's not going to defeat the incoming strikes, which means you don't have the maneuverability to compensate for it. In something like a Brooklyn, you can dance with torpedo bombers. In this thing, not so much. Still valid choice here in my opinion. Artillery maintenance, you could go any of these really. Given that there's no other ship skills, I've gone with a survivability build, sort of. You could consider Daredevil maybe, but definitely the fully prepared makes sense, and if you already have that, then you may as well just take the survivalist. Exploit weakness, because you do more damage if something is fire or flooding, and these things have good synergy with carriers, so that makes sense. And extinguisher, because not really an awful lot of important skills further up. These are ships where I would actually maybe consider using the IFHE, because the HE shells are really, really nice on these 150s. So that might be a worthy consideration. And then either take horizontal protection or giant hunter at the last one. Although you're not going to get there that quickly unless you're obviously switching your commander over from something else. So, the Omono. Let's get into some battles, have a bit of a look, and I'll talk a bit more about my opinion of this ship and the line so far in general. In the first round, we find ourselves being top tier against Ryujo, Nagato, Colorado, Lyon, Tokachi, New Orleans, and a lonely Yudachi on the enemy team. We do have a Minsk, and the jury's out there if it's Mayhem or Mahan, but one of those things. So these two should be able to dominate the center of the capture circle without too much trouble. And we have some AA. I think it was a Brooklyn on our side. So you definitely want to stay on the HE. I've got Nagato here with me. You can lend some AA support to destroyers. The problem is with that, again, the lack of maneuverability or the poor maneuverability, because it means that you will be shot at relatively early on, and being shot at is not something that these ships are particularly happy about. So I'm going, given that there's no carrier strike incoming anyway, so for now I am going to go around the flank, and then we will see. Also, the Brooklyn is heading inwards, so he can help with air defense, and the friendly carrier fighters are going to win that battle, hopefully. Enemy carrier isn't doing an awful lot just yet. We're going around the flank and see if we can get angles onto the center cup and shoot at potentially the Yudachi if she comes around that corner there. And maybe we can make something happen here against other targets as well. It's a good firing position, and as you can see, please carrier, would you mind? How did your fighters win that, and then you're not doing anything else after it? I'm not understanding. Anyway, we've got the Tokachi, we've got the New Orleans spotted, and I believe there's something else. So carrier, please, if you wouldn't mind, planes, thank you. And we will start firing at the New Orleans. One thing you can notice here, and what are you doing out here, Mahan? Anyway, the other one's in the Kiev is in there, so that should be all right then. So we'll just give some fire support here. The other thing that you notice, and yes, there's the Yudachi. Can I? Okay, I'm torn here between my you need to deal damage and you need to support your team sort of role. The other problem that you see here is that the dispersion is terrible, but that's sort of a thing that you have at these kind of guns in this tier anyway. But the firing arcs are relatively good, and that's a permafire on the Lyon. And what the world is the Minsk just YOLO'd in the center in the middle of two cruisers, Lyon under carrier attack, and got himself killed. And the Mahan is sailing around the outside. Great. Anyway, Lyon's burning, it's also on permaflood, I believe. So however, we have a problem with the Tokachi here. So we need to clear out that center cup because we are way behind on points. So that guy's going. The firing arcs, as you can see, are great. You can just fire across, over islands in a similar way that you can with the American light cruisers. So Tokachi should be dead. That thing has a lot of AA, but it's deceptive because it's only, I can't remember which one it was, but I am coming under carrier attack, and as you can see, this is a tier 6 carrier. So we've dealt with the Tokachi. This is a tier 6 carrier. You can take out a third of the strike wing before it's coming in, and the rest of the way out without much trouble if you've got the defensive AA up. That the AA is, well, there's plenty of it. Okay. So given that the Mahan has no interest in capture control, the Minsk has just suicided. It means that I'm going to have to do this myself then. Fortunately, the Lyon has been taken care of, which means that the threat on the flank is gone and I can go in there. The Yudachi is still in there, and yes, he has deep water torpedoes, but It's something I can probably deal with if we get the New Orleans out of the way there. And yes, as you can see, the firing angles are absolutely great. So that New Orleans is gone. That leaves the Yudachi. Now Yudachi, obviously, the problem here when you're starting to fight destroyers becomes that you are that you don't have any utility. I don't have sonar. Look at the dispersion on those guns. Yes, you have 12 guns, but getting on anything but broadsiding battleships, getting any of them on target is a miracle, honestly, waiting to happen. So that said, you do have a lot of them, so that makes up for something. So that Yudachi is now running relatively low on hit points, and is now probably planning to go undetected or smoke up and drop some torpedoes on me. So I have to be really careful. I'm gonna slow down already, hard turn right, and I'm gonna drop torpedoes myself into the smoke screen. I can kind of see where he might be from the traces, but there are gonna be torpedoes incoming. So I'm already turning. Yep, there come the Yudachi torpedoes, and I get him with one of my torpedoes. If he had 2 torpedo launches ready, I would have been dead here. So dealing with enemy destroyers in this ship is it's not an easy task. And that's sort of, again, where the support cruiser role kind of falls short on these. They're not support cruisers. They're not really suited towards that. They are more suited to play similar to the heavy cruisers in terms of just, you know, torpedo spewing, gun, fire setting, long range kind of fire support things, with the additional benefit of having lots of anti-aircraft fire. And the Mahan has finally managed to take out the enemy carrier after chasing him around and going around the long way, while the cruisers have taken the center of the map, as is customary in these kind of games. That sort of puts you into a little bit of a pickle. Because if you want to deal some damage, you have to farm battleships, basically. Everything else isn't really going to net you an awful lot. The problem with that, obviously, is that you're then, neglecting your role as a light cruiser in terms of dealing with threats. So they're a bit more like the like Soviet light cruisers in that regard. They have some utility, but they don't have the laser sharp and accurate armor-piercing damage output again you can use against destroyers even at long range, which is what makes a Soviet light cruiser so dangerous, like a Shores at this tier. They're really more there for, well, setting fires and farming battleships, because that's really mostly what they're good at. And I'm sort of struggling with that a little bit in terms of my expectations, because again, I'm in a light cruiser and I'm expecting to do other things. Which brings us to our second battle, and once again we are actually top tier. This is a tier 7 battle. We're not even in a tier 8 game. We are fighting Furious, Nagato, Prinz Eitel Friedrich, Dunkerque, a Shumfon, Auber, and a Jervis. I don't know if I pronounced that Pan-Asian cruiser correctly. I'll have to look it up, actually, what that is. But we are playing Frozen Shelter Epicenter, which once again sort of puts you in a pickle, right? So in something like a Brooklyn, I would have said, okay, I'm going to go middle. Yes, you are risking taking battleship fire from 2 directions, but I'm in a Brooklyn. I can bow in, dodge incoming shells if necessary, and give some fire support to the Jervis. Much harder to do in this thing. So, yes, as you can see, I'm sort of playing with the idea of going middle, helping the Jervis, parking, using the islands there. But then again, terrible maneuverability and no utility. I don't have any sonars, so I can't see any torpedoes coming. I don't have an awful lot of armor. I mean, neither does the Brooklyn. But nope. I'm gonna go and do more ranged support, and that's really sort of the style where you and Jervis. What the heck are you doing? Oh, okay, you're being attacked by aircraft. Fair enough. So they're up, but I think we just shot one plane down and that was it. So enemy Jervis spotted, right? This is where in a Shores, that Jervis would be in a world of trouble. In this thing, not so much, because dispersion says nope. To be fair, Brooklyn couldn't do that either, but if we get some shots on target, the high explosive does hurt. So yeah, it does work. I'm just reversing in a little bit, but yeah, obviously the friendly Jervis has no intention whatsoever of contesting the middle, so the enemy team's holding all 3 capture circles, and there's not an awful lot I can do about this. Now I can help out against the Dunkerque over there, and lob the shells, make use of my superior angles, shoot a couple of planes down. If the defensive AA isn't up, not an awful lot you do, but then again, this is the same with all the others. Try to lend a bit of air assistance. What on earth are my battleships doing there? These people subscribe to the capture circles are lava philosophy of gameplay. And yeah, at this range, I'm not going to be doing anything against something like a Jervis, which means that it's up to my Atlanta on the other flank to do something. Okay, friendly Jervis, 2 battleships against the Dunkerque, and there comes the enemy Jervis, probably running away from the Atlanta. So let's see if we can do something about that little bugger. Nope, that would be a negative. And again, here in a Brooklyn, I'd be running my sonar, I'd be having the armor piercing loaded, and I'd be unleashing hellfire onto that thing. Unfortunately, I am not, so I am not. Which means I have to slow down, I cannot give chase, I cannot hunt down the destroyer. And I don't have the accuracy at range to really do something with it, which is utterly frustrating if you're in a light cruiser and you are sort of bereft of the ability to... you feel like you're in a support cruiser, but you're sort of not. Now, in the Pan-Asian line, that's pretty clear, because you're not your scout cruiser. But we have, fortunately, with some help from the Atlanta, managed to get that thing sorted. So maybe we can start holding a capture circle. That would be great, team, wouldn't it? We just lost the Gneiser now on our team. So I'm trying to get into the middle here, but there's obviously an Aoba who's been paying attention. And the 2 battleships on my team are really not doing it. Well, they're no use to the team alive, as Jingles would say. So this is going to be hard. I can't stay here because I'm coming under fire from the Dunkerque, the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, the Nagato, the Aoba over there. There's not an awful lot I can do. I can't stay in the center cup. I need to get out of here, which means because I just don't have the survivability or the maneuverability to deal with that, and I'm also coming under air attack now. So we can set a permafire, I believe, on the Dunkerque, and at least we can deal with the carrier. I'm very much in favor of the carrier going after me rather than going after my teammates, but that also meant that I can't get into the center cup and actually take it. Now, we can probably take out the Dunkerque here. Nope, Gneisenau takes him out, actually. And take out the Alba. I'm trying to remove reasons for my battleships not to be in the capture circles, honestly, at this point. Jervis, you're no use to anybody here either, are you? How about you? Well, who am I kidding? It's not really going to happen. There's the enemy Furious. So we get a couple of shots onto that thing, but well, we've set another fire. The amount of damage that you're dishing out is not great. You can, if you get your torpedoes on target, do a decent amount. That's for certain. But you have fewer torpedoes than in the heavy cruisers, and yep, there's a Schumpf one. And like I said, in a close range engagement, these things are not very good. Because again, also 150mm guns rather than the 203mm. Ow, and very much even lower tier battleship battle cruiser caliber guns can very much hurt these things. So had to dodge those torpedoes. Prinz Eitel Friedrich sitting pretty much unmolested in the center cup there. Maybe we can get the Nagato sorted out, but again, the 2 battleships that are with me here are not particularly helpful. Trying to assist the Atlanta and the carrier with setting fires on the Prinz Eitel Friedrich and finish these 2 off. The problem is obviously that the enemy team's been sitting on the capture circles the whole time, so there's not an awful lot you can do in these kind of situations. But it's you're a bit limited in this ship. It's I can see the intent, but it's not great at what it does. So look at the dispersion on these guns. It's hilariously bad. I'm shooting at 5 kilometers at a scout cruiser at point blank range. Now I'm getting a couple of them in, but again, in something like a Shores, that thing would have been dead a minute ago. Now that should do him in, but again, I'm probably gonna have to be careful with torpedoes here. So full on reverse, turn hard in, and finish off the Prinz Eitel Friedrich. The only thing that's good here is the firing arcs. And yes, we did get the double strike there, but the problem is that the enemy team has been holding the capture circles for the whole battle, and the enemy carrier is not an idiot, so he's not spotted. And that battleship, our friendly battleship, who has never even come close to the capture circle, has made it all the way to the end of the map, which means the timer has run out, and we have lost this. So, is this a good ship? I don't know. I'm not super convinced. I think if you like the Japanese heavy cruisers and you kind of wish they had better AA, and you're happy to play the same style, then this could be a class of ship for you. They're not easy to play, that's for certain. Don't be deceived in that they are support cruisers, because they're not really. Dealing with destroyers is actually difficult with these ships due to the lack of utility and the atrocious dispersion on the main guns, and the atrocious maneuverability. The things that you are good at is kind of doing. Think of it like a Brooklyn that has torpedoes, but not really any utility. So the support role really is reduced to taking AA, or lending AA support to your team, and other than that, you're best off playing it just like a heavy cruiser. My main gripe with these things is the poor maneuverability and the dispersion on the guns, which makes them quite difficult to play out in the open, and really requires positional gameplay. So at least with the Tier 7, I was very much not convinced that this is a class of ship that I would personally go after. But then again, like I said, if you like the Japanese heavy cruisers, you might be interested in this one. But it's less a Japanese flavored US light cruiser group. It's more a heavy cruiser derivative with better AA. Let me put it that way. And we will see how the rest of the line plays. Next, I will probably take on the Tier 10 just to see if the grinds is worth it in any kind of way. And we'll see how that goes. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.